For nearly 2,000 years, something has refused to disappear. Not a kingdom. Not an empire. Something far more dangerous. An idea. A structure that no longer exists. Yet somehow still shapes the present. A temple. Built. Destroyed. Rebuilt. Destroyed again. And now. Spoken of once more. But here's what makes it unsettling. The third temple was never just about stone. Or sacred ground. It's about identity. Authority. Belief. And a question history has never been able to answer: what happens when something that was never meant to return does? To understand the weight of this idea, you have to go back to a world that no longer exists. Ancient Jerusalem. At its center stood a structure unlike anything else in human history. The first temple, built under Solomon. But calling it a temple almost minimizes it. Because to those who lived in that world, this was not symbolic. This was literal. A fixed point where the divine and the human overlapped. Where heaven touched earth. Everything revolved around it. Remove it, and you don't just lose a building. You lose orientation. And in 586 BCE, that's exactly what happened. The Babylonians didn't just destroy a city. They shattered a worldview. And yet, something survived. Not walls. Not gold. But memory. Years later, a second temple rose in its place. Not identical. Not as grand. But carrying something invisible. And far more powerful: continuity. The belief that what was broken could be restored. For centuries, it stood. Empires rose and fell around it. But the temple remained. Until 70 CE. When Rome arrived. And history repeated itself. Not gradually. Not symbolically. Completely. The destruction was total. And this time, something changed. After the second temple fell, there was nothing left to rebuild. No foundation. No sovereignty. No control. Only absence. And here's where the story becomes unsettling. The center of faith disappeared. But the faith itself did not. It adapted. Quietly. Almost surgically. Without a temple, belief became decentralized. Portable. No longer tied to a place, but to a people. Synagogues replaced sanctuaries. Text replaced ritual space. Community replaced geography. The temple didn't return. It transformed. Into memory. Into longing. Into something that couldn't be destroyed. And that's where the third temple begins. Not in construction, but in absence. Because once something becomes memory, it can become expectation. A question began to form, slowly, across generations: was the destruction final? Or temporary? Would what was lost ever be restored? In Jewish thought, this question doesn't have a single answer. And that's what makes it powerful. Because ambiguity keeps ideas alive. Some traditions speak of a future temple. Others reinterpret the idea entirely. But none of them fully let it go. Now we move from idea to reality. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The ancient temple stood on what is now called the Temple Mount. A place layered with meaning. Not just for one belief system, but for three. Today, that same ground holds the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. For millions, this is already sacred. Already complete. Which creates a tension that cannot be ignored. The idea of rebuilding the temple exists in a space that is not empty. And never will be. So this isn't just theology. It's geography. It's politics. It's reality pressing against belief. When people hear Third Temple prophecy, they often imagine certainty. A timeline. An inevitable sequence of events. But that's not what the sources actually offer. Texts like those attributed to Ezekiel describe a future temple. But they don't read like blueprints. They read like visions. Dense. Symbolic. Sometimes internally inconsistent. Which creates a deeper question: Are these descriptions meant to be built? Or understood? Because the difference between those two changes everything. From that ambiguity, multiple interpretations emerge. Some believe the third temple will be literal, a physical structure, measured, constructed, visible. Others reject that entirely. They see the temple as symbolic, a representation of spiritual restoration, not architecture. And then there are frameworks that place it inside a larger narrative, one involving transformation, redemption, or renewal. But none of these views dominate completely. And that's what makes the idea unstable. It exists without resolution. So why hasn't it faded? Why hasn't time erased it? Because this isn't just about religion. It's about something more universal, the human inability to accept permanent loss. Every civilization carries this pattern: a beginning, a fall, a belief that something can be restored. The third temple is one of the clearest expressions of that instinct. Not just to remember, but to return. Today, the idea exists in multiple forms at once: as belief, as scholarship, as cultural memory. There are those who study the temple historically, others who explore its rituals, and some who see it as part of a future that hasn't fully unfolded. But at the same time, the world it would exist in has changed radically. And that creates friction. Because ancient ideas don't always fit neatly into modern realities. Here's where the narrative often breaks down. The third temple is frequently reduced to headlines, predictions, fear. But that simplification misses the core truth: there is no single, unified prophecy. What exists instead is a layered conversation, shaped by history, theology, interpretation. And that makes it both powerful and dangerous to oversimplify. So what comes next? Not in events, but in meaning. Because the future of the third temple depends entirely on how it is understood. As a building? A symbol? A transformation of belief? Or something else entirely? And that's what makes this different from most historical narratives. There is no fixed endpoint, only evolving interpretation. At its core, this was never about construction. It was about connection. Between past and future. Between loss and restoration. Between what was destroyed and what refuses to stay gone. Because some ideas don't disappear. They adapt. They embed themselves deeper. They wait. So no, the third temple prophecy isn't a prediction. It's something more difficult to define. A tension. A question that has outlived empires. And maybe the real question isn't, will it be built? But, what would it mean if it was? If you want more stories that go beyond surface level history, subscribe. And tell me, do you see the third temple as something that will exist in the physical world? Or something that already exists in a different form? Because sometimes, the most powerful ideas in history aren't the ones that happened. They're the ones that never fully went away.